The scissors glinted under the fluorescent lights, their sharp edges whispering promises of transformation or ruin. Elias sat rigid in the barber chair, his heart hammering louder than the buzz of clippers across the room. He wasn't here for anything more than a trim. But the way Mateo's dark eyes locked onto his in the mirror felt like a dare to want more. Elias had moved to this sleepy Ohio town 3 months ago, fleeing the chaos of Chicago's expectations, his family's demands, his ex's betrayal, and the weight of a life he no longer recognized. At 26, he was starting over, piecing himself together in a place where nobody knew his name or his secrets. The barbershop, Razor's Edge, was a local staple, its red and white poles spinning lazily outside like a beacon of normalcy. He'd chosen it because it was close to his new apartment, because he needed to look presentable for his first real job interview, and because he didn't expect to feel anything at all. But Mateo was not what he expected. The barber, maybe a year or two older, had a presence that filled the room, broad shoulders, a faded tattoo peeking from under his rolled-up sleeves, and a smile that could unravel anyone's defenses. His hands moved with precision, snipping Elias's overgrown curls with a rhythm that felt almost intimate. Each brush of his fingers against Elias's scalp sent a jolt through him, a spark he tried to ignore. He wasn't ready for this. Not now. Not after everything. You're new around here. Yeah. Mateo's voice was low, smooth, like the hum of a car engine on a quiet night. He tilted Elias's head gently, their eyes meeting again in the mirror. Yeah, Elias managed, his throat tight, just settling in. Mateo nodded, his gaze lingering a beat too long. This town's small, but it's got heart. You'll see. He paused, then added, You got a story, don't you? Elias froze. The question wasn't just small talk, it was a probe, an invitation to spill secrets he'd buried deep. He forced a laugh, deflecting. Doesn't everyone? Mateo's lips curled into a knowing smile, but he didn't push. Instead, he worked in silence, the snip of scissors filling the space between them. The shop was alive with chatter-old men swapping stories, a woman laughing with her stylist, the radio playing a soft R&B tune, but Elias felt like they were alone, caught in a bubble where every glance carried weight. He'd always been careful, guarded, growing up black and queer in a family that preached love but practiced judgment had taught him to keep his heart locked away. His last relationship, with a man who promised forever only to leave when things got real, had only deepened that resolve. Elias didn't trust easily, and he wasn't about to start in a barbershop, no matter how disarming Mateo's smile was. Yet, as Mateo's hands moved, brushing stray hairs from his neck, Elias felt something shift. It wasn't just the touch, it was the care in it. The way Mateo seemed to see him, not just his reflection. When Mateo stepped back to admire his work, he tilted his head, studying Elias like an artist assessing a canvas. You clean up nice, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that made Elias's chest tighten. Thanks, Elias muttered, avoiding the mirror. He didn't want to see himself not the man he was pretending to be, nor the one he was afraid to become. Mateo didn't move away. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath warm against Elias's ear as he reached for a cloth. You should come back next week, he said softly. Keep this looking sharp. Elias's pulse raced. It was a simple invitation, but it felt more like a thread pulling him towards something dangerous and alive. He nodded, unable to find words, and stood to leave, the weight of Mateo's gaze following him to the door. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, the streets quiet except for the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. Elias walked home, his mind replaying every moment in that chair, the scissors, the touch, the eyes that saw too much. He told himself it was nothing, just a haircut, just a fleeting spark in a town he'd leave behind someday. But deep down, he knew better. Something had begun, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. The next week, Elias found himself back at razor's edge. His excuse flimsy even to himself. The interview had gone well, landed the job as a graphic designer at a small local firm, but his hair didn't need another trim so soon. Still, he'd booked the appointment, telling himself it was about routine, about fitting into this new life. But as he pushed open the shop's door, the jingle of the bell felt like a warning. Mateo was there, leaning against the counter, laughing with a customer. His eyes flicked up, catching Elias's, and his smile shifted less casual, more deliberate. Back already? He teased, motioning to the chair. You must like my work. Elias shrugged, trying to play it cool, just keeping it tight. But as he settled into the chair, the air felt charged, heavier than before. Mateo's hands moved with the same precision, but there was a new familiarity in his touch, a confidence that made Elias's skin prickle. The shop was quieter today, the hum of conversation replaced by the soft croon of a jazz playlist. It made every word between them feel louder, more significant. So, you got the job? Mateo asked, his fingers grazing Elias's neck as he adjusted the cape. Yeah, Elias said. Surprised Mateo remembered. Starts Monday. Nice. You're gonna kill it. Mateo's voice was warm, but there was an edge to it, like he was holding something back. He worked in silence for a moment, then said, You don't talk much, do you? Elias tensed. Not much to say? Mateo chuckled, low and soft. I don't buy that. You've got a whole world in those eyes. Man. The words hit harder than they should have. Elias glanced at the mirror, catching Mateo's gaze again. There was no escaping it. Those dark eyes seemed to peel back layers, searching for truths Elias wasn't ready to share. He wanted to deflect, to change the subject. But Mateo's presence was disarming, pulling him in like a tide. You always this nosy with your clients? Elias asked, trying to keep his tone light. Only the ones who interest me. Mateo shot back, his smile wicked. Elias's breath caught. Was that flirting? He wasn't sure, and he hated how much he wanted to know. He'd spent years building walls, keeping people at a distance. But Mateo was slipping through the cracks, and it scared him as much as it thrilled him. As Mateo finished the trim, he stepped closer, his fingers lingering on Elias's shoulders as he brushed off stray hairs. You ever go to the festival downtown? He asked casually. It's this weekend. Music, food, good vibes. Elias hesitated. He hadn't planned on getting involved in this town, on making connections that could complicate things. But Mateo's invitation wasn't just casual, it was a door opening, and Elias wasn't sure he could keep it closed. Maybe, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Mateo grinned, like he'd won something. I'll be there. Look for the guy with the best fade in town. Elias left the shop feeling unsteady, like he'd stepped onto a tightrope without realizing it. The festival was a bad idea, he knew it. Crowds, music. Mateo's smile was a recipe for trouble. But by Saturday, he was there, weaving through the bustling streets of the town square. The air thick with the scent of grilled food and the sound of a local band playing soulful covers. He spotted Mateo near a food truck, his laugh carrying over the crowd. He was with friends, a mix of faces that reflected the town's diversity: black, white, Latino, young and old, all drawn to Mateo's easy charm. When their eyes met, Mateo waved him over, and Elias felt his resolve waver. You made it, Mateo said, handing him a drink from the truck. Their fingers brushed, and Elias's heart skipped. Yeah, Elias said, taking a sip to steady himself. Couldn't resist the hype. They spent the evening together, moving through the festival, talking about nothing and everything: music, dreams, the way the stars looked brighter out here than in the city. Mateo's friends welcomed Elias like he belonged, but it was Mateo's attention that kept him anchored, his laughter that made Elias feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. As the night wound down, Matteo led him to a quieter corner of the square, away from the crowd. "You're not what I expected," Matteo said, his voice soft but serious. "You're real." Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, to admit how much this night meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded, and Matteo's hand brushed his, a fleeting touch that felt like a promise. The festival had changed something. Elias couldn't shake the memory of Matteo's hand brushing his, the way their laughter had woven together under the starlit sky. He went back to Razor's Edge the following week, telling himself it was just habit. But his pulse betrayed him the moment he saw Matteo's grin. "You're becoming a regular," Matteo teased, guiding him to the chair. "What's next? You gonna get a tattoo to match mine?" Elias laughed, easing into the familiar rhythm of their banter. "No, I'm not that bold yet," Matteo said, his eyes glinting with mischief. The haircut was quick, but the conversation lingered. Matteo asked about Elias's new job, his favorite music, his dreams, questions that felt like keys turning in locks Elias had long kept shut. He found himself answering, sharing pieces of himself he hadn't meant to give. He talked about his love for design, how he'd once dreamed of illustrating children's books, how moving here was his chance to start fresh. Matteo listened, really listened, his hands pausing mid-snip to absorb every word. "You're an artist," Matteo said, almost to himself. "That's why you've got that fire in you." Elias didn't know how to respond. No one had ever called him that, not with such conviction. He felt exposed, but not in a bad way, like Matteo was seeing the parts of him he'd forgotten how to love. When the haircut was done, Matteo didn't step back. Instead, he leaned in, his voice low. "There's a poetry slam at the community center tomorrow night. You should come. I'm reading something." Elias's first instinct was to say no. Poetry slams were too raw, too vulnerable. But Matteo's eyes held him, steady and warm, and he heard himself say, "I'll think about it." He went. The community center was packed, a mix of locals and college kids spilling across folding chairs. Matteo took the stage, his presence commanding, his words sharp and soulful. He read a poem about love and loss, about hiding who you are to survive, and Elias felt every line like a blade. When Matteo's eyes found his in the crowd, it was like the room vanished, leaving just the two of them and the truth in his words. Afterward, they walked through the quiet streets, the night cool and heavy with possibility. "That was about you, wasn't it?" Elias asked, his voice barely steady. "The poem?" Matteo stopped, turning to face him. "Parts of it. I've spent a long time hiding, Elias, being who people expect. But you make me want to stop." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. Elias's heart pounded, torn between running and staying. He'd spent so long protecting himself, but Matteo was dismantling his defenses with every word, every look. Before he could think, he stepped closer, their faces inches apart. "Matteo," he whispered, not sure what he was asking for. Matteo's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "I see you, Elias, and I'm not going anywhere." They didn't kiss. Not then. But the moment felt bigger than that, like a vow neither of them had spoken yet. Elias went home that night, his mind a storm of fear and hope, knowing he was falling and unsure if he'd survive the landing. Elias couldn't avoid Razor's Edge. Anna Maria was a pull he couldn't resist. Each visit deepened the connection, their conversations growing bolder, their glances more charged. But with every step closer to Matteo, Elias felt the shadow of his past looming larger. He hadn't told Matteo about his ex, about the betrayal that had left him hollow, or the family he'd left behind who'd never accept him as he was. He wasn't sure he could. One evening, after a particularly quiet haircut, Matteo invited him to stay late. "I'm closing up tonight," he said, his tone casual but his eyes anything but. Want to stick around? I've got some beer in the back. Elias knew he should say no, but he didn't. The shop was empty. The lights dimmed. The air thick with the scent of aftershave and possibility. They sat on the worn leather couch in the back room, sipping beers and talking about everything Mateo's childhood in a tight-knit Latino family. His dreams of opening his own shop. The way he'd come out and lost friends but gained himself. You ever feel like you're running from something? Mateo asked, his voice soft. Elias's grip tightened on his bottle. All the time. Mateo leaned closer, his knee brushing Elias's. You don't have to run from me. The words broke something in Elias. He wanted to believe them, wanted to let go of the fear that kept him tethered to his past. But before he could speak, Mateo's hand was on his, warm and steady, and then they were kissing slow at first, then desperate, like they'd both been starving for this. When they pulled apart, Elias's heart was racing, his mind a blur. I'm not good at this, he admitted, his voice shaking. I've been hurt before. Mateo's eyes softened. Me too. But I'm willing to try if you are. They spent the night talking, kissing, laughing, the shop their private world. But as Elias walked home at dawn, reality crept in. He was falling for Mateo, but he hadn't told him the whole truth about his ex, about the shame he still carried, about the fear that he wasn't enough. He didn't know if he could. The next day, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. His stomach dropped when he saw the message. I know you're in Ohio. Elias. We need to talk. It was his ex, Jamal, the man who'd broken him 2 years ago. The past wasn't done with him yet. Jamal's text was a ghost that haunted Elias for days. He didn't respond, but the words lingered, clawing at the fragile hope he'd built with Mateo. He went to work, smiled through meetings, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in memories of a love that had turned toxic. Jamal had been his first everything first love, first heartbreak, first lesson in how trust could shatter. He avoided Razor's Edge for a week, making excuses to himself about being busy. But Mateo wasn't so easily deterred. On Friday, he showed up at Elias's apartment, a six-pack in hand and a worried look on his face. You ghosting me? Mateo asked, half teasing, half serious. Elias let him in, his heart heavy. Just dealing with some stuff. Mateo set the beers down and sat beside him on the couch. Talk to me. Elias. What's going on? Elias wanted to tell him everything, but the words stuck. Instead, he kissed Mateo, hoping to drown the fear in something real. But Mateo pulled back, his eyes searching. Don't do that. Not to hide. Elias's chest ached. He took a deep breath and told him about Jamal, about the years of hiding who he was, about the family who'd called his love a sin. Mateo listened, his hand steady on Elias's, never looking away. When Elias finished, Mateo pulled him close. You're not alone in this, he said, and you're not broken. The words were a lifeline, but the fear didn't vanish. The next day, Jamal texted again, this time with a photo of himself outside Razor's Edge. I'm in town. Meet me, or I'll find you. Elias's blood ran cold. He didn't want Jamal anywhere near Mateo, near the life he was trying to build. He met Jamal at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee was bitter and the air was thick with grease. Jamal looked the same tall, charming, his smile a weapon. You look good, Elias, he said, leaning back in the booth. Missed you. What do you want? Elias asked, his voice flat. Jamal leaned forward, his tone softening. I messed up. I want you back. Elias laughed, bitter and sharp. You don't get to do this. Not now. But Jamal wasn't done. He talked about their past, about the good times, and Elias felt the old wounds reopen. He left the diner shaken, unsure of what he wanted, but certain he couldn't let Jamal ruin this new life. Elias went back to Razor's Edge, needing Mateo's steadiness to anchor him. But when he walked in, the shop was different tense, the air thick with unspoken words. Mateo was behind the counter, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding Elias's. "What's wrong?" Elias asked, his stomach twisting. Mateo hesitated, then pulled him to the back room. "Some guy came by yesterday, asking about you. Said he was an old friend. Didn't feel friendly." Elias's heart sank. "Jamal, what did he say?" "Nothing specific," Mateo said, his voice low. "But he knew your name, your schedule. It didn't sit right with me." Elias wanted to tell him the truth, but shame held him back. Instead, he said, "Just someone from my past. It's nothing." Mateo's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me, Elias. I'm not just your barber." The words stung, but they were true. Elias took a breath and told him about Jamal's visit, about the threats veiled as apologies. Mateo's face hardened, but his hand found Elias's, squeezing tight. "You don't have to face this alone," Mateo said. "I've got your back." That night, they went to Mateo's place, a small apartment filled with books and vinyl records. They cooked dinner together, the tension easing with every laugh, every touch. But as they sat on the couch, Mateo's fingers tracing the buttons of Elias's shirt, the moment shifted. He undid the top button, then another. His eyes locked on Elias's. "I want you to trust me," Mateo whispered, his voice raw. "All of you." Elias's breath hitched as Mateo's hands moved lower, not just undoing fabric, but unraveling years of fear and doubt. It wasn't just about desire, it was about letting someone in, letting them see the scars beneath the surface. They made love that night, slow and deliberate, each touch a promise to stay, to fight, to be enough. But the next morning, reality crashed in. Jamal was waiting outside Mateo's apartment, his face a mask of anger and hurt. "You think you can just move on?" he spat. "You're mine, Elias." Mateo stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "He's not yours. Walk away." The standoff was brief but electric, Jamal's eyes burning with resentment before he turned and left. Elias felt a mix of relief and dread, knowing this wasn't over. The confrontation with Jamal left Elias shaken, but Mateo's presence was a steadying force. They spent the next few days together, building something fragile but real. Elias opened up more, sharing stories of his childhood, his dreams, his fears. Mateo matched him, revealing his own struggles, coming out to a family that didn't understand, fighting to carve out a space where he could be himself. But Jamal wasn't gone. He sent texts, left voicemails, each one a reminder of the past Elias couldn't fully escape. One night, he showed up at Razor's Edge after hours, banging on the door while Elias and Mateo were cleaning up. "I know you're in there," he shouted, his voice slurred with anger. Mateo moved to open the door, but Elias stopped him. "Let me handle this." He stepped outside, facing Jamal under the flickering streetlight. "You need to stop," Elias said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "I'm not going back." Jamal's face twisted. "You think he's better than me? He doesn't know you like I do." "He knows me better," Elias shot back. "Because he sees me, not who he wants me to be." The words were a revelation, as much for Elias as for Jamal. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own worth, the strength of the life he was building. Jamal stared at him, then turned and walked away, his shadow fading into the night. Back inside, Mateo pulled Elias into a hug, his arms a safe harbor. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," Elias said, and for once, he meant it. The weeks that followed were a quiet kind of healing. Elias threw himself into his work, his designs gaining praise at the firm. He and Mateo grew closer, their relationship a mix of passion and peace. built on trust and shared vulnerability. They faced the town's whispers, some kind, some cruel, but together they were unstoppable. One evening, as they sat in Razor's Edge after closing, Mateo took Elias's hand. "You changed me," he said. "Made me braver." Elias smiled, his heart full. "You did the same for me." The barber shop, once just a place for a haircut, had become their sanctuary, a place where they'd found each other and themselves. And as Mateo leaned in to kiss him, Elias knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together, two souls who'd cut deeper than skin, finding love that was worth every risk.